Welcome guys! In this video I'm showing you how to create tights in Clo3d. We're starting off with the first part, which is where I'm gonna sketch out the patterns. So the patterns are basically two rectangles, each for one leg, and then the sides are the inner leg seams as well as the center front and the center back. So leg 1, and we have a leg 2, and then we have the side in the middle and two bows on the bottom which are showing our toes. So we have to do some kind of rounding for the toes. Kind of weird shape that I just have been drawing is the crotch insert, and then we have two parts for the waistband, and the crotch insert is basically essential for good movement. And then we're doing stitching on both the front seam and the back seam, so center front, center back, and we're gonna stitch the legs together and the bottom toes. Second part is the construction in Clo3d. So as I just explained, we're gonna create a basic rectangle, doing left click, and then we're just gonna enter our measurements that I have taken prior to creating this tutorial and that I've tested out a lot. So we have 18 centimeters in the width and around 95 centimeters in the length. And what we've done now is we just created half of a leg. So this is the part from the center front or the center back to the side. And later on, we're just gonna mirror that and merge the two pattern parts to get one pattern part. And of this one, we're gonna create a symmetric pattern. We're gonna click on the toe line, do a right click, add split, do a uniform split, so now we have half of it. Then we're doing an internal line of around 2 centimeters. Yes, and then we're gonna create a curve, a Bezier curve. So we're just gonna use again the internal line tool, and then we're gonna draw our bow. So we can also manually adjust the angle again of our bow until we think it looks nice. I think this is okay now. As you can see now, it's just an internal line on the bottom, so we're gonna trace the whole pattern. We're doing a left click and then hold shift and then trace as pattern with the right. Then we can delete the other one and also delete the internal line that we used for the toes because it's not serving us anymore. Yes. Great. So now we're gonna copy paste it and then we are gonna merge on the side. So we select two lines with the internal line tool or edit line tool, edit pattern tool, and then that's it. So we have one leg done. What we have to do now is we have to measure out the tights and the areas where we want our center front and center back to be and how large our crotch insert is. So we're gonna do a right click on the line again and go to split, and then we're adding in our measurements for the center front, which is around 13 centimeters. And then we're gonna click OK. So we have the center front defined. Yes, we're gonna do the same thing now on the center back. You will say now, okay, but wait a second, center back is usually way higher than center front. This is true, but in knitting we do it a little bit differently. And also the other issue is if you have patterns and then you're adding this like a pattern, like a stripe, and then you're doing this a little bit differently, then you will get a really weird kind of look around the inner leg seam, and you actually don't want to see that because you're doing circular knitting, right? So you have to be conscious of that. And we're just gonna try to fit it around the butt area. So we will make it work. We're now adding in a split line again. Here we're gonna do 47 millimeters, so around 4.7 centimeters. This we're gonna do for the crotch insert. Yes, on the other side as well. So center front, center back. Then we have crotch insert lines. And then we're gonna draw out our crotch insert. The easiest thing is to just draw a rectangle with basically the double height and the width that we want our crotch insert to be. So we are doing a width of like 5 centimeters and a height of 8 centimeters. So we have this basic rectangle, and then we're just gonna split always in the middle. So split, uniform split. We're gonna do this on all sides, split, uniform split, and here as well, split, uniform split. Yes, once we've done that, we can just use our internal align tool and connect them all together. And then we're just gonna cut with right click. When we are in the edit pattern tool, we do right click, cut. And we're just repeating this on all sides, and then we have drawn this out easily. If you were to draw this with just the polygon tool and just draw it out on your own, yeah, I tried it. It's the easiest way to just use the rectangle if you have this kind of mirror shape. Or otherwise, just draw out a triangle with all the same sides and then again copy paste it and then merge it. So now we have this drawn out. And the thing that we're gonna do now is we also have to draw out our waistband. We're just gonna use the rectangle tool again. Here I'm also just drawing the side again. So just one side, and then I'm gonna copy it and merge it. I mean, I could also just draw the whole rectangle, but for me, this is one of the easiest workflows to do. So I'm deciding how large I want to have it. I mean, you could also just, as I'm doing right now, I'm just creating the rectangle with the measurements, or you can just randomly draw it out and then fit it on later once you are in the 3D mode. I'm also doing this rectangle way too wide, so usually the waistband is always a little bit smaller than the other pattern, but we're gonna adjust this later with some simple clicks. Yes, we're merging the centers, so this will be the side now. What you see in tights very often is that the center front, so the waistband, is often not a separate pattern, but it's knitted onto the material, so onto the edge, and then everything is stitched together in the center front and the center back, and the crotch insert is edited in. Third part, we're just gonna arrange our patterns, and then we have to mirror them and stitch them together. First thing to do, we're just removing the shoes, because if you're simulating with the shoes, it makes things a lot more difficult. We go into the tools on the left hand side in the 3D window and opt for the arrangement points. We're arranging the waistband, we're arranging one leg, just doing some micro adjustments here. I mean, pay attention that it's not going too far into the body. And then we're also gonna arrange the crotch. Yes, so one side done. And now we're just gonna create a symmetric pattern of the two leg parts. Here we still have to do some adjustments of the arrangement, so it's already arranged in the right shape, but we still have to move it towards the body. And yes, that's it for the arrangement, more or less. Now, fourth part is the sewing part. Now it's getting really interesting, because I've noticed that making this or doing this in really small steps is the easiest way. So first thing you're gonna do is stitch together the waistband. And then you're just gonna freeze all the other pattern parts that they stay arranged. And what you're gonna do later is just do the waistband first. So we're gonna stitch together the waistband, then we're gonna do the adjustment that it fits right in the waistline. And afterwards, we're gonna freeze it. Right, so for the arrangement, we're still pulling it up a little bit more towards the waistline, because tights are usually quite high-waisted. As you can see, the other pattern parts stay where they are, and the waistband is way too big. So it would be super loose on our avatar. Then we are stopping the arrangement. We're moving back to the 2D window, we're selecting both of them, and then we're just gonna do a transformation. So we use the pattern select tool and just pull them together a little bit and do a reduction of 10%. This is usually enough. Then we click simulate again, and then it fits perfectly in the waist. I mean, this is just for optical reasons. If you were to create it for production, so for tights and production, you can't really use 3D simulation to help it anywhere in the production state, but more or less in the product development state for the current situation of technology. So for the design part, this is fine. It doesn't have to be super accurate. So we have been unfreezing both of the pattern panels for the legs, and we froze our waistband just like I have explained. We keep the crotch frozen. Now we're gonna stitch together the waistband and the two leg parts and hit simulate. And here you can see that I already stitched together the two inner leg seams, and that was not really smart because now everything is tangled in the avatar. So I stitched together the inner leg seams. Now everything is tangled in the avatar, and that's what I mean. So when you're doing tights, just be super patient, do one simulation step at a time, because now just trying to pin everything in place is not gonna help you a lot. So I mean, you can try it and push and pull and do whatever, but it's not gonna help you a lot. But I keep doing it because I just want to show you how you shouldn't do it. I did this a lot in the beginning when I was doing tights the first times in 3D or in Clo3d, and I just hated it because I was like, oh, that's such a shame that it doesn't work that well. Another really important step is to add a quite accurate material. I mean, I don't have any tights fabric measured in, and there are so many things you can do with tights. So it's knitted, but you can knit it in so many different ways that it has a lot of different aspects of elasticity. So we're just gonna use the knit cotton rayon. I think it works quite well. Now we stitch together the center front and the center back, and as you can see, still no improvement. It's still stuck in the legs, even though we've added a different fabric and not the default simulation fabric, and even though we have been stitching together center front, center back. I will just be removing edit sewing tool and just remove the sides. This will help a lot. And then we click simulate again. Now on one leg it's really tangled together, so we had to help the simulation a little bit, but now it looks like a little skirt with two legs. Now we can just pin everything into the right location. So I made the experience that with pinning everything towards where it should be with really tight things, this is one of the easiest things to do. It may seem like a lot of work because we're just pinning and pinning and pinning and doing the same thing also in the front. But when you stitch it together, it usually stays where it's supposed to be. And if you were to stitch it without pinning it first in place, then you probably would have the same issue like we had in the beginning. Sometimes I'm doing some weird pinning that it's like making folds and stuff, then it doesn't look nice. Now we're adding together the inner leg seams again. We stop the simulation, and now we're just removing pins. You could also just do it by just right click and remove all pins, but I like to do it one by one, which nobody understands, but I like this. So now we have a nice pair of trousers with a hole in the crotch. Now it's time to unfreeze the crotch. And the easiest way to stitch a crotch believe me, is to do it in 3D prior to having it simulated on one side, because then you can see all sides and it's quite a tangled stitching situation. So if you're not that good at sewing or thinking about stitching things together, then this is probably the best way to do it. I'm usually also checking again in 2D if it makes sense what I've stitched together. And as it's really tight, you can see that it has some big issues in simulating this because it's so stuck within her two legs. So, but it looks fine. So it's not entangled or anything. Here we have, or here you can basically see how much tension is on it. So it's quite high. Fifth part, fitting the toes. Most difficult activity of this video probably. We're going into the preferences, then we're going into simulation properties, and we're first gonna switch off our floor. So we go to ground, and in the collision we turn this off. So remove this tick. Next thing we're gonna do, we're just gonna use the patterns. Again, same method as before, just use it and make it larger. So we're not selecting the pattern, but we're selecting the lines and just increasing it by a few percentages. And we're gonna repeat this again. Yes, now this is longer. This is quite an important step, because I've noticed if you're not doing this and it will be way harder to fit the toes. So now I have enough material in the front that I can stitch together the toe lines, and it makes it way easier, believe me. What I'm doing first before I'm stitching it together is I'm pinning the toe line out the back towards the toes, that it's closer together, because otherwise it's gonna stitch through the toes, and simulating around the toes is already quite exhausting and difficult. So doing this is also helping a lot. Simulation around the toes takes the most time, so fortunately it's already easy. Now, we simulated it first, and now we're gonna stitch together the toe line. Yes, stitch. Now I've noticed that basically I still have a split in my toe line, so I'm just gonna remove and delete the point, or converting it to a curve point. You have to convert it into curve point, because if you delete it, then it's gonna be flat. So now we can just stitch it easily. You could also do it with the M&N sewing tool, but if you can just transform a point into a curve point, it's easier. Now you see what I mean with simulating around the toes. It's quite difficult. And the higher you have your particle distance up, so now it's on 20, which is nice for simulation because it goes super fast, but it's not gonna be accurate, and you will have a lot of collision with the body. Whereas if you put it to 5, your simulation will be super slow, but then it's gonna fit easier around the toes. Just a little side note along the way. So we're just trying to make it fit so we can reduce the length again of our patterns. Now it actually looks okay. So, I mean, it doesn't look okay, but it looks okay. And now we're gonna use the pin box or the pin lasso tool to freeze the area punctually, or just pin it down punctually around the toes so we can reduce the patterns. We're clicking the patterns, reducing them, right click, and we're reducing them to 90%. And now we're just gonna simulate again, and you can already see it's pulling around the heels. Now we're deleting our pins, delete all pins, and now you can see it still doesn't really look nice, but at least it looks okay. Now we're just pinning down with the same tool again, but this time in the pattern piece, around the tips of the toes to make it stick before we steam. So this is the 6th part of this video. We're steaming the legs that they fit around the ankles. The ankles is so tiny in comparison to the rest of the pattern that it just keeps to show or to have excess material. So I reduce the opacity now that we can actually see how it doesn't fit on the body. But if you would decrease the pattern width again, I mean, it would fit nicely around the ankles, but there would be so much tension on the top, as a pair of tights does nearly have a 300% amount of elasticity, so it can stretch out to 300% of its original size, which means that steaming it is one of the best solutions to it. So I usually steam with 40% because I've noticed that then the deformation within the pattern, so if you later add on texturing, it doesn't show as badly. So I'm just using 40% and just going around with the steaming tool. Please be aware that you shouldn't lift it so don't lift it again and start again, because otherwise you're doing double steaming and then you have pattern deformations. But you can still see it's not perfect, so I removed it and did a 60% decrease or shrinkage, and it's not actually becoming better, but it's deforming the pattern a lot, so we don't like that. If you simulate now, I'm in simulation mode now, and you can see it's not a big improvement from the 40 to the 60. And you could still go higher, but I've noticed that the deformation around the pattern is awful. 7th part, more fitting around the toes. What I wanted to say is that often when I'm doing tights, I'm also importing them afterwards into Blender, so I can fit them a little bit better around the ankles. If you want me to do another tutorial about that, let me know, because I have a pretty good workflow in importing it into Blender again and then making it stuck on the tighter around the avatar. What I did now is I reduced, so we reduced the skin offset as well, and we're reducing the particle distance now. First to 10%, that the simulation is not going super slow, because otherwise we will have to wait a lot and a lot and a lot for this tutorial. So we're in simulation now, and you can still see it looks horrible around the toes. I mean, it kind of fits, but it's still showing the toes. And with the 5 of particle distance, this will help a lot as well. So I like to use 5, but then it's better to have all the texturing and everything already done, because otherwise adding up applications or textures takes way longer if you're doing some adjustments with the edit texture tool or etc. Yeah, so you see, it's quite a hustle, and it just doesn't want to go over the big toe. Yeah. We're fitting and fitting and fitting. So one side usually turns out to be fine, whereas the other side then is not fine. So it's always the same with doing the fittings, and then I remove pins, I add pins again. So it's quite a complex workflow, or it's quite an annoying workflow. So once I have a pair of tights fitted, I usually use it all the time so that I don't have to do some readjustments, because sometimes I'm also using some other poses, and then if you, for example, do the tights in a different pose because you want to render it, it's often with super tight garments, putting them into a different pose or animating them is quite a hard task. So I really like it when I have kind of a set of tights. Also, sometimes I'm doing patterns differently that I can use all the time, and just copy the file, rename it, and then I'm using it for the texturing. We are pinning here again, guys, because the seam line that I'm still having on show is not on the right angle. Now, there's still this kind of, the seam is a little bit not super sharp in the inner leg. And yeah, around the ankle it still doesn't look perfect, but I think we're fine for now. So this is basic pair of tights. What we're gonna do is we're gonna unfreeze all the other parts so we can see the material, and then we're adding in some color and some rib. Yeah, so texturing in top stitches. We're adding in a rib for the material of the waistband, because usually it looks quite ripped, so it's quite nice. We're going into the property editor of the texturing tool, and I just recolored it in black because I want a black pair of tights. Same thing for the knit cotton rayon jersey. Also, I went into the property editor and changed the color to black, and the opacity is still on 80, so it looks fine. Good. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add in some top stitches. Most of circular knitted tights are just 2 tubes of legs that are later on stitched together. So this is usually the tights that we buy. And we just opened up the ISO 607 for needle stitch, and I'm doing some adjustments now. If I'm going too fast, you have to either put it on a slower pace, the video, or go back. So I'm using an offset of 0 and an SPI of 19, and I adjusted. I mean, this is not the correct stitches that are used for stitching tights together, be aware of that, but I think it looks okay. So for me it was more for the looks, that it looks accurate and not that it's actually the right stitches that are done. And now I'm gonna add it with the free top stitch tool into the areas where I need it. So center front and center back and around the crotch. So I'm just going down the seam lines. I think we can be happy with our result. I mean, we can still see the panties underneath, but that's just how it is. In the next video, we're gonna look into texturing in 3 different methods. So thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. Have fun!